Hi, I'm Odessa. My parents told me I was born to support the star. So I stood quietly while they cropped me out of family photos, sat me behind catering tables, and told everyone I'd left the military because I couldn't handle it. They called it love. But what kind of love deletes your name from a service record? What kind of family tells guests you're just admin support when you were the one leading operations no one's allowed to talk about? At my sister's promotion ceremony, they erased me again, until her general stood up and called me by a rank they never believed I'd earned. What happens when the person you buried doesn't stay quiet? What happens when the silence salutes back? I crossed the state line just as the sky shifted into that dusty amber only North Carolina manages to perfect in late October. Fort Liberty hadn't changed much, but then again, I hadn't expected it to. Military bases rarely age. They just settle into themselves like veterans with too many medals and too few friends. As I drove past the south gate, the guards barely glanced at me. That felt right. I've always been the kind of story people choose not to know. No one was waiting for me when I pulled into the driveway. I sat in the car longer than necessary, watching the familiar front porch like it might react to my presence. It didn't. My mother hadn't responded to my last two texts. No surprise there either. I'd grown accustomed to silence being her preferred language. When I finally stepped out and gathered my overnight bag, the crisp air bit at my collar. The leaves scattered along the walkway, crunching under my boots. I paused on the porch, hand hovering over the doorknob. Then I pushed it open. Laughter drifted from the back of the house. Meredith was entertaining. Of course she was. The dining room lights were on, chairs pushed close around the table. No one noticed me. I passed through the living room and stopped short. The family photo above the mantel had been updated. There was Rayburn, stoic as ever. Leora, radiant in her dress blues. My younger cousin's son filled the far corner, where I remembered standing in the last version of that picture. I stared at the frame, slightly off-kilter on the nail. Then, gently, I adjusted it. Upstairs, the guest room smelled like lemon cleaner and thyme. I set my bag down, pulled out my phone, and opened the group family chat. I'd sent a simple message the week before. "Proud of you, Leora. See you soon." It was gone. My messages log confirmed it was delivered, which meant only one thing. Meredith, as group admin, had deleted it. She never did like clutter. That cut deeper than any direct insult. Words unsaid can be sharp, but words sent and erased, that's a decision. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence roll over me. Across the room, the closet door was ajar. I knew what waited behind it. But first, my mind wandered. Backward, as it often did. I was 10 when Rayburn first set up the training drills for us kids. My brother got to be squad leader. Leora played the field medic. I was given a clipboard and told to observe for strategy. I didn't know then that observe would be my lifelong assignment. "You've got good eyes, kiddo," my dad said once. "Not everyone gets to be the face of the mission. Some of us support the stars." He said it like it was noble, like I should be grateful. And for a while, I was. Until I realized stars burn out. And some of us never even got to glow. The guest room hadn't changed much. Same beige walls, same quilted throw folded at the foot of the bed. My suitcase sat unopened beside it. I unzipped it slowly, pulling out the ceremonial jacket I hadn't worn in over a decade. The fabric still held its shape, stiff, unyielding, a metaphor I couldn't unsee. I laid it across the bed, smoothing the edges. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, letting the years fall away. The woman staring back wasn't invisible. She wasn't a footnote. She had led men through chaos, made decisions that haunted her, held hands of soldiers who didn't make it home. "You can't hang medals on walls where you've been erased," I whispered. The door creaked, and Meredith stood in the frame, arms crossed. "You arrived," she said. "Good. Try not to wear anything bold tomorrow. It's Leora's day." I held her gaze. "I'm not here to take anything." "Good," she replied, walking off, "because it's not your moment." I waited until her footsteps faded. Then I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My fingers grazed the lapel of the jacket again. The silence in this house wasn't just emptiness, it was engineered. Some families use words to wound. Mine? We use omission. I checked the medals inside my bag. All polished, all irrelevant here. The only recognition that mattered to them was what fit in a frame, what could be posted with hashtags, what Leora could wear without my shadow touching the edge of her spotlight. I leaned back against the headboard, eyes tracing the ceiling fan's slow rotation. This wasn't grief, it was something colder, and maybe more useful. They'd written their story so long, they forgot I knew how to hold a pen too. Later that night, I reached into my uniform bag once more. I didn't put the jacket on, not yet. I laid it out with care, pressing the sleeves flat. Then I whispered, maybe it's time they remembered who used to wear this. Maybe it was the lighting in the guest room that morning, or the way the air felt too still, like something was waiting to be said and wasn't. I sat at the edge of the bed, holding a photo I should have stopped looking at years ago. It was my cadet graduation day. Everyone was in dress blues. The version I kept in my drawer back home had all of us in the frame, even if I stood slightly off to the side. This one? This one was cropped, tight, clean, efficient. My shoulder was gone. Erica and our brother looked centered, proud, perfect. I looked like I had never been there at all. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. Whoever did the cropping had taken care not to make it obvious. But I saw it. I always saw it. And I'd learned that the most dangerous kind of rewriting wasn't done with words. It was done with scissors. I didn't put on the uniform, not yet. Instead, I changed into a neutral blouse and slacks, nothing bold, nothing worth commenting on, and drove myself to the ceremony hall. Fort Liberty hadn't changed much, but the people inside had. Or maybe just their willingness to acknowledge me had. No one greeted me when I walked in. A junior staffer looked at my ID, then frowned slightly. "You're admin support, right?" I held her gaze for just long enough to watch her flinch. Then I smiled. "Sure," I said. "Let's go with that." She led me to a row in the back, near the catering tables. It wasn't labeled, just a handful of generic chairs. No names, no affiliations, no ranking. I sat. No one turned around. It was almost impressive, the way invisibility could be choreographed. While waiting for the event to begin, I scanned the official event program. The layout was glossy, patriotic. Family highlights, photos from prior promotions, holidays, deployments. And there, right in the middle, was a photo from one of the family celebrations, one I vividly remembered attending. I remembered standing next to my father in that picture. In this version, I was gone. Again. "You had to cut me again," I whispered under my breath. "Even from this?" It didn't sting, not like it used to. It just confirmed what I already knew. They weren't erasing me out of cruelty. They were doing it for comfort. I rose to find my seat at the reception table. I'd been told the seating would be alphabetical. But when I reached the spot where my name should have been, there was a card that read Lieutenant Danvers. Not even close. I picked it up, turned it over. Nothing on the back. A senior aide wandered over, distracted. "Sorry, we had a seating mix-up," he said without looking at me. Across the room, I saw Meredith guiding Erica's media liaison toward the front row, laughing with that perfectly timed warmth she reserved for performances. That's when I realized it wasn't a mix-up. It was strategy. I returned to the back, no longer interested in pretending to belong at their table. I sat alone and listened to the click of polished shoes on marble floors, the way officers adjusted their uniforms with practiced ease. The room filled with familiar sounds, but none of them belonged to me. When Erica entered, the room stirred. Light applause, a few handshakes, flashes from someone's phone. She walked like someone who had been practicing for this moment her whole life. And maybe she had. Her uniform was perfect, her smile effortless. She glanced my way, nodded, but didn't approach. Meredith rushed forward and embraced her like a soldier returning from war. I stayed seated. Not because I wasn't capable of standing, but because I'd stood in more war zones than Erica would ever know. They just didn't have photographers. I shifted in my seat and glanced around. People had started to settle. A few whispered to each other. A few glanced in my direction and quickly looked away. I let my hands rest on my lap, breathing slowly. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to flinch. Behind me, two junior officers chatted in hushed tones. One of them murmured, "She looks familiar. Wasn't she in that canceled op? The ghost commander?" I didn't move, but my fingers curled around the edge of the seat. I didn't sleep. Not really. I laid there, watching moonlight stretch its way across the ceiling until it caught the edge of the uniform bag sitting silently at the foot of the bed. It stared at me like it had its own memory of being forgotten. Some medals aren't worn. Some uniforms don't make it out of the duffel, not because they're retired, but because pulling them out would make someone else feel less than. And in this house, that's a bigger crime than lying. At some point past midnight, I got up and opened the bag. My hands were steady as I pulled out the jacket. The fabric was stiff, pristine. Too pristine. The collar still held the crease from its original fold. The insignia shimmered faintly in the low light. It was beautiful, and it was buried for years, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered to the wrong person. I reached for the file tucked beside it. Old commendations, sealed evaluations, even a personal note from a now-deceased general tucked between 2 pages like an accidental bookmark. The note had just one sentence, scrawled in the corner with a pencil that had faded over time. "You'll get yours in the long game, Walsh, or you'll disappear for their comfort." And there it was. Raptor Climb. That mission should have been the moment everything shifted. We were in hostile territory, non-permissive zone, no air cover. Intel was a mess, communications worse. I took a team across the line, extracted 6 captives and 2 bodies. We lost no one else. The report I filed was detailed, clear, precise. Then it was scrubbed. They gave the public credit to Colonel Hansen, a man who hadn't even been in the region. My name? Buried under Joint Command. The version that hit the press said, "A collaborative effort by U.S. personnel." I stopped reading after that. No one in my family asked about it. No, "Are you okay?" No, "We're proud." It wasn't on TV, so in their minds, it didn't happen. Leora once said to me, back when she was still pretending to listen, "What's the point of leading if no one sees it?" I didn't answer then. But my answer came loud and clear now, as I stared at my untouched awards. To make sure someone gets home, not someone gets famous. When morning finally arrived, I was already dressed. Not in the uniform. No. That stayed folded on the bed. I just stared at it for a long moment before gently brushing off the thin layer of dust that had gathered over time. Dust from neglect, not from dirt. I placed the jacket on the chair by the window, its sleeves neatly arranged as if they held form on their own. I wasn't going to wear it. Not yet. Not for them. But I needed it out in the open. Needed to remind myself that I had worn it once, and I could again. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen, familiar, bitter. I moved downstairs, footsteps quiet on wood I'd once been scolded for running across barefoot. In the dining room, Meredith was already halfway through her first cup, speaking to a neighbor. My father's voice joined hers, listing off Leora's assignments with the enthusiasm of a man who believed every word held weight. She led that logistics buildup in Stuttgart last year, really took initiative, and before that, oversaw a security rotation in Seoul, kept her team tight, minimal incident. I leaned against the doorway, unseen. Not that it mattered. None of those missions had required pulling a bleeding corporal over a ridgeline under sniper fire. None of them ended with 3 letters of condolence, handwritten by me, sent overseas. But they were the ones mentioned, the ones framed. I could have walked in, spoken up, corrected them, but what would that have done? Instead, I walked past the entryway and into the small sunroom off the kitchen, sat down in the chair that still wobbled on the left side. I watched the wind tug at the flag outside. It flapped with that familiar tension, half freedom, half burden. They didn't need to see me to be reminded I existed, and I didn't need to argue anymore to know I'd done the work. I whispered Hemingway's words under my breath. Courage is grace under pressure. As the clock neared 8, I stood, walked back up to the room, folded the uniform once more, not to hide it, but to carry it. And before I zipped the bag shut, I caught my reflection in the mirror. You didn't lose rank, I said to myself. They lost the right to see it. The hall was already humming when I arrived. Boots echoed off the marble floor. Medals clinked softly as high-ranking guests shook hands, exchanged familiar glances, and took their places with practiced ease. I entered alone, a printed badge folded in my coat pocket, and a quiet reminder in my mind. Don't expect anything. A young usher, no older than 20, looked up from her clipboard as I approached. She scanned my badge, then squinted. See? Walsh? You're with staff, right? I said nothing at first, just let the silence make her fidget. No, I replied evenly, but thank you. Her face flushed red as she gestured toward the rear row, next to the catering entrance. No brass plaques, no designation of family, just a scatter of chairs half obscured by a serving cart. I took my place, the name card resting at the seat beside me, Lieutenant Danvers. Not even close. Behind me, the aroma of reheated meatballs lingered in the air. Around me, the others settled into their assigned places up front, where the camera lights were brighter and names were said aloud. Rayburn spotted me from across the aisle, walking stiffly in my direction, with that parade ground posture he never dropped. His eyes flicked to the misplaced card, then to me. It's just a name, he said with a shrug. Don't make it bigger than it is. I met his gaze without blinking. You're right. It's not big. It's consistent. He didn't reply. He turned and walked away, his shoulder brushing past a lieutenant who stepped aside to let him through. That's how it always was. Small slights wrapped in military protocol, delivered like fact, never insult. As the room filled further, I stepped out for air. The cold didn't bite as much as I'd hoped. Behind the building, the wind carried pieces of a ceremony that hadn't started, but had already left its mark on me. I heard footsteps behind me, light and fast. I turned to find Leora's daughter, my niece, bouncing on her heels. Hi, she beamed. Mom said you didn't finish military school. Did you get kicked out like Jordan's brother? My stomach didn't twist. It folded. I bent down, eye level with her. No, sweetheart, I just went somewhere they don't take pictures. She nodded like she understood, then ran off to chase a butterfly near the security barricade. I stood there for a long time after, not because I was hurting, but because it took time to translate that kind of pain into stillness. Back inside, I found my seat still empty. The room buzzed now, officers laughing too loud, polished boots shifting restlessly. One woman nearby, in a charcoal blazer, turned to me. I'm Monica, she said, extending a hand. I work with the civilian administration team. I heard Erica say you're at Veterans Affairs now. That's commendable. I shook her hand, firm and brief. Helping people find what they've lost, I said, is what I've always done. She smiled politely, then turned her attention toward the stage. As we waited for the formal start, Meredith appeared, like a shadow you thought you'd escaped, but always finds you at your most still. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Let Erica have her moment. Please don't interrupt anything. I didn't flinch. I wouldn't dream of speaking over someone so well amplified. She stared at me, calculating. I gave nothing away. She walked off, and I could almost hear the click of control in her heels. A man in full uniform took the stage, voice booming through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to celebrate Lieutenant Colonel Ashby's promotion. I didn't move, didn't breathe deep. I simply gripped the edge of my seat, not from nerves, but to stop myself from standing too soon. Dinner the night before the ceremony felt like a performance for an audience that had already left. The table was dressed like it belonged in a magazine spread, too polished, too color-coordinated. No one was eating. Meredith raised her glass, and with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, toasted Erica as the embodiment of everything our family stands for. I stared at the fork beside my plate, its tines perfectly aligned, untouched. No one acknowledged I was there, not directly, but the air shifted every time I moved, like they were waiting for me to disrupt their carefully arranged silence. I excused myself without a word, stood, and made my way down the hallway. Just before I rounded the corner, I caught Rayburn's glance. It wasn't concern, it wasn't curiosity, it was a warning. The same look he gave recruits right before a verbal dressing down. I didn't break stride. Upstairs, I replayed the phone call that started this mess. Meredith's voice had been flat, as if reading from a script. Just don't wear anything distracting. Let this be Erica's moment. She said it like she was doing me a kindness. I'd been standing in a crowded airport terminal in Germany when she called. Just come off a 14-hour flight from the field. No one met me at the gate. No one asked if I'd made it back. I'm not here to be seen, I'd said then, just to witness. Back then, I believed it. Now? I heard the rot in those words. Morning came fast. I was up before the sun, moving through the kitchen quietly when I heard the rustle of papers. Erica sat at the island, dress uniform hanging on the pantry door, flipping through her speech notes. Her face looked as it always did before she stepped into the spotlight, polished, prepared, and wholly certain. She didn't look up when she spoke. You're not planning to do anything weird today, right? I opened the fridge, took out the water pitcher. I'm planning to be quiet, I said, tone even. That's what you've trained me to be. She looked up, blinked once, then laughed. Too high, too fast. But she didn't argue. I placed my glass down. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed sheet. Folded, but clean. I slid it across the counter. She hesitated, then opened it. It was the redacted military email, the one sent anonymously years ago, questioning my leadership during a mission that had saved lives, the one that nearly ended my clearance. Her face paled as she scanned the text. She knew it. I could see it. You used my silence like a weapon, I said. I'm just showing you I was listening the whole time. She looked up, jaw tense. You shouldn't be here. I stepped back, smile restrained. I should have never left. That was your mistake. The words hung between us like a drawn blade. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and left the kitchen, footsteps controlled, unhurried. In the hallway, Meredith appeared like a ghost, too rehearsed to surprise me. Her voice was softer this time, almost pleading. You're not going to start something, right? I looked at her with a calm I didn't feel. No, I said. I'm going to finish something. She blinked. I didn't stay long enough to see what else she had to say. Back in my room, I reached for the uniform bag. For once, I didn't hesitate. I didn't hide it. I carried it openly as I stepped out the front door, my heels clicking sharp against the steps. At the entrance to the ceremony lobby, I paused. I still wasn't wearing it, but now I was carrying it where everyone could see. The back row always has a particular chill to it, not from the AC, but from irrelevance. I sat where I was told, behind rows of polished brass and stiff shoulders, surrounded by people whose glances slid right past me like I was a support beam holding up a room they preferred not to decorate. Across the wide hall, Erica floated. That's the only word for it. She moved like someone who had timed every blink, rehearsed every smile. The MC leaned in to say something, and she tilted her head just so, like a scene rehearsed in front of the bathroom mirror. I watched. That's what I do best, apparently. The prelude began. Bright visuals, upbeat music. A montage of family service moments played on the large screen above the stage. Flag ceremonies, commendations, childhood snapshots in camo onesies. And then, there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. I recognized the opening frame, candle strike. The operation had a visual signature even in its redacted form. A brief clip flashed. A desert, a chopper, 3 silhouettes moving low against a burning sky. That was mine. But before the segment could fully unfurl, the screen cut sharply to Erica's boot camp graduation. Clean, cheerful, parent-approved. Not a glitch. A redirect. I didn't blink. My hand, however, tightened just slightly on the edge of the program booklet. No one around me stirred. No raised brows. No whispered confusion. The edit had worked exactly as intended. Quiet, invisible, thorough. I felt a glance before I saw it. Meredith turned around slowly in her seat, 3 rows ahead, eyes sweeping the crowd behind her, landing briefly, deliberately, on me. We locked eyes. She blinked once, then faced forward again. It wasn't a tech error. It was a decision. There's a quote I read once, Elie Wiesel, I think. Silence isn't neutral, it's consent. I straightened my spine and folded the booklet in half, neatly, like I was dismissing a file no longer needed. When Erica took the stage, applause fluttered politely. She adjusted the microphone and began with all the poise of a publicist's dream. She talked about loyalty, about perseverance, about what it means to lead from the shadows when recognition isn't guaranteed. The phrasing was familiar, too familiar. True leadership, she said, is about absorbing consequences without demanding applause. My breath paused mid-inhale. That was mine. My line. From a leadership memo I drafted during an off-record training in Cyprus. It had never been published, never circulated widely. But I'd shared it once, quietly, with Erica. Back when I still thought being sisters meant sharing truth. To the crowd, she sounded wise, grounded. One officer near the front leaned to his colleague and whispered, "She's grown. That line hit hard." I didn't flinch, but I noted his nameplate, because if people were going to quote my life, I deserved to know who was echoing it. As the speech continued, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet, my original memo. I opened it on my lap, unlocked my phone, and took a photo with a timestamp. I didn't plan to post it, I just needed the record. Then I slid the paper beside me on the seat. Not to show anyone, just in case they ever asked. The applause built again as Erica closed her remarks. She smiled like someone who knew the cameras were capturing all the right angles. The lights caught the insignia on her collar, the ones she'd earned publicly, and in part, through what wasn't hers. She stepped off the stage, nodding as hands reached out to congratulate her. I leaned forward slightly and murmured to no one in particular, "Your voice sounds clearer when it's stolen from silence." They swarmed her like she was the last clean flag on a battlefield. Inside the reception hall, the hum of pleasantries masked the undercurrent of performance. Officers, retired brass, civilian dignitaries, all orbiting Erica with easy praise and practiced admiration. She was radiant, back straight, smile sharp, eyes gliding from handshake to handshake like a politician trained in diplomacy from birth. I stood near the bar, half-shadowed behind a floral arrangement so perfectly centered, it looked more staged than the speeches. No one addressed me. I didn't expect them to. That's not how ghosts are treated. We're not ignored. We're simply not included. Erica is the embodiment of discipline, Meredith announced as she clinked her glass. She stayed. She earned. She never ran. There it was. Not just the applause. The precision-engineered message. I gripped the edge of my chair, feeling the fabric dig into my palm. The people laughed, clapped politely, sipped their drinks. No one asked who she might have stepped over to reach that pedestal. And then Erica took the microphone. "I used to think loyalty meant staying no matter what," she began. "But sometimes it takes walking away to realize what you left behind wasn't the problem. It was you." The air inside me stopped. I had written that line. Not in a diary, not in a blog post, but in a classified debriefing following a decision I made during a moral standoff in a remote outpost. No press, no podium. Just lives in the balance, and a signature at the bottom of the order. Meredith beamed. Rayburn nodded slowly, the way he did when someone said something he wished he'd said first. Erica smiled as if she'd peeled the words from her own backbone. I stared ahead, pulse steady. The betrayal didn't hurt, not anymore. It confirmed something I had long suspected. Erica hadn't come here to succeed. She came to inherit. And she wasn't picky about which legacy she needed to carve up to do it. Near the punch table, a young officer leaned toward her. That op, Raptor climb? My cousin was part of the evac. You're a legend for that. My breath didn't catch. It calcified. Because Raptor climb was mine. I planned it, executed it, and carried out 2 of the wounded myself when comms went dead. Erica had read the reports. She had been stateside. She just smiled and gave him a modest shrug. She didn't correct him. Of course she didn't. I walked to the edge of the room, far from the catered lighting, opened my secure drive on my phone, located the original field briefing, my signature at the bottom, typed a short note. Not for revenge, for record. Then sent it to my encrypted archive. I closed the screen and tucked the phone in my coat pocket. I turned to a junior officer standing nearby. He nodded at me, vaguely familiar. Nice speech, huh? I offered a smile. Truth has its own legs. It always finds the room eventually. He tilted his head, uncertain whether that was a compliment or a warning. As the music shifted to background strings, Meredith approached. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her voice was low, tight. She's everything I hoped you would be, but you broke formation. I leaned closer, calm in a way she didn't expect. I didn't break formation, I said. I broke the silence. She blinked, lips parted slightly. Then she walked away. I watched as Erica posed beside the commander for a final photo. Shoulders squared, a handshake caught mid-frame. I slipped a flash drive onto the event photographer's table, right beside the shot list. It held no virus, no scandal, just dates, times, and authorship. Truth, archived. Then I walked out, quietly. The seats were arranged like a chessboard, each name a designation, each row a hierarchy. But my name wasn't there. Again. This time, there wasn't even a mistake to hide behind. No misspelled card, no swapped place tag. Just absence. I stood near the catering station for too long before a junior aide approached, clipboard in hand and confusion on her face. "You're with the vendor line, ma'am?" she asked hesitantly. I smiled, slow and precise. "No, you'll know who I am soon enough." She blinked, nodded as if she understood something she didn't, and walked away. The front rows were already filling with the predictable cast. Family in their best conservative suits, generals whose resumes were longer than their patience, local dignitaries hunting for photo ops. I took a seat where no one could see me clearly, but everyone could see me enough to wonder why I was there. Erica took the stage like she had rehearsed every movement, and maybe she had. She opened with gratitude, slid effortlessly into symbolism. "Some sacrifices," she said, "come from those who couldn't stay the course. We honor them too." I watched her mouth the words, then glanced down at the military pin on my lapel. First time I'd worn it outside of a classified facility. Funny how something so small could weigh more than a sidearm. "They thought I came unarmed," I whispered under my breath. "But I came wearing history." Erica's voice rose with rehearsed intensity. Loyalty, integrity, perseverance. Each word hit like a stone skipped across water, smooth on the surface, hollow underneath. Meredith sat in the front row, beaming, her applause always just a beat ahead of the crowd's. Then the room shifted. The door near the west entry opened without a sound, but the energy changed instantly. Not from sound, but from recognition. General Alvey walked in. No introduction, no fanfare, just presence. His eyes swept the room. They paused on no one, until they landed on me. And then he walked, straight, deliberate, unwavering, across the floor, ignoring every hand that reached out to greet him. He stopped directly in front of me, raised his hand. "General Walsh, ma'am," he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "An honor to see you again." The air stilled. Erica's voice faltered mid-sentence. Her next word caught in her throat, never made it out. Meredith's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor. I stood, not to grandstand, not to perform, but because no one salutes a sitting general without a return. I returned his salute with the same form I was once taught to execute under enemy fire. And then the whispers began. Did he say, "General? Walsh?" I thought she wasn't military anymore. A few officers stood. A major 2 rows ahead dipped his head in acknowledgement, eyes wide with sudden memory. Cameras turned, lights adjusted. For the first time in years, I was seen, and not by accident. Erica dropped her note card. It fluttered down like a leaf, forgotten. She bent to pick it up, but her hand trembled. Rayburn stood halfway, then sat back down slowly, as if trying to blend into the furniture. Meredith didn't move. She stared at me like she had finally remembered who I used to be, and couldn't quite reconcile that with the woman in front of her. I didn't stay for applause. I didn't need it. I walked out the side door, slow and unbothered. As I passed the last row, a young lieutenant leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Was that the ghost commander from Dagger?" I didn't turn, just smiled to myself. You don't need to yell the truth when it salutes first. Outside, the sun had risen higher than I'd expected. The sky was clear, wide open, unapologetic. And as the ceremonial flag descended behind me, I stepped into the light, my shadow now longer than ever before. The sun didn't feel like victory when it touched my shoulders. It just felt honest, real, like it had no agenda. I stood in the courtyard behind the hall, coffee cup in hand, half full and long gone cold. The crowd inside thinned out slowly, like no one wanted to be the first to leave a room where a truth had just exploded. Meredith and Rayburn whispered in tight circles near the brick pillars, avoiding my eyes. Erica, surrounded but alone in all the ways that mattered now. I didn't walk over, didn't wave. I let the silence stretch. A vibration pulsed in my coat pocket. I pulled out my phone. One new message. Anonymous. The subject line was familiar in the worst possible way. I opened it. It was a forwarded version of the same redacted report that had once threatened to strip me of my clearance. The smear campaign in grayscale. Except this time, someone had traced the metadata. The digital signature? Leora's. From a base login in Kuwait. 3 years ago. You don't always see the knife in your back, I thought, but you remember the hand that held it. I didn't react. Just saved the file and let it sit in my archive, next to the others, all neatly organized by betrayal. Later, I found Meredith near the catering table. Alone for once. I approached and showed her the file without saying a word. She flinched, lips tightening. "You could have forged this," she said after a moment. "You've always had your own style." I didn't smile. "I've had my own silence too, and I'm done letting it be misquoted." She said nothing, just left the coffee she brought for me on the table and walked away. I didn't drink it. On my way back to the guest quarters, I passed the maintenance bins near the back parking lot. Something caught my eye, a crumpled bouquet in the trash, wilted roses and eucalyptus still clinging to a ribbon. I stepped closer. There, still attached, was the card I had written days earlier. "Proud of you, even if you can't admit what that costs," I had scribbled. My name had been scratched out, like it was offensive to be acknowledged. I didn't feel anger, not this time. I took a photo of the card, then slipped it into my bag. Not for revenge, just for memory. I climbed the steps to my quarters slowly, watching the way the trees moved in the wind. Soft, indifferent. At the landing, I passed Leora. She stood alone now. No admirers, No camera lights. Just her, spine rigid, eyes tired. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with something between guilt and pride. That confused middle ground, where people don't know whether to apologize or defend themselves. I nodded once, nothing more. Walked past her without stopping. We weren't at war anymore, I thought, but we'd never be at peace either. Back in my room, I set down my bag, took off my shoes, and opened my laptop. This time, I typed the report under my real name. The quiet the morning after wasn't heavy. It wasn't celebratory either. It was clean. Like rain had passed through and swept everything unnecessary away. I was already up before the first traffic buzzed outside Fort Liberty's gates. The coffee machine sputtered beside the sink as I checked my messages. None urgent. My uniform still hung on the chair, still unrumpled, still powerful even off my back. I opened my bag to repack, and that's when I saw the envelope. Cream-colored, sealed, no stamp. The handwriting stopped me. General Alvey's predecessor, Colonel Matthew Wren. Dead now, 2 weeks gone, cardiac failure in a Virginia hospital. A man who once told me that paperwork only told half the truth, and mine had too many redactions to be understood by the average reader. I opened it slowly. Walsh, it read. No salutation, no preamble, just truth. You were always the unclaimed asset, the one too sharp for press releases. The Candlestrike decision, they'll debrief it in simulations for a decade and still get it wrong. I saw what you did. Not just the extraction, but the silence after, the way you wore it. You were more than visible, you were vital. The truth has a way of filing itself. Let them call you Ghost. Ghosts can walk through walls. It wasn't a eulogy, it wasn't gratitude, it was a record. And that meant more. I folded the letter and tucked it back into my folder. No need to scan it. I believed him, and that was enough. Around 9 a.m., I walked the loop behind the training field. No direction, just habit. Halfway through, a voice called out, soft but steady. Ma'am? A young man, maybe late 20s, stood a few yards away. Prosthetic from the knee down, barely visible under pressed fatigues. I recognized the posture, Marine. He walked toward me, each step deliberate. Were you the one at Dagger Ridge? He asked. The one who made the call to hold fire until we could move? I nodded once. Yes. His lips parted slightly. They never said who did it. I only knew someone stalled the command long enough for us to make it out. He stood straighter, lifted his hand, and saluted. I got home, he said. His voice caught. I just wanted to say thank you, while I still can. I didn't salute back. I stepped forward and took his hand. You don't owe me that, I said, but I'm glad you're here. We stood for a beat, then two. Then he turned and walked off, his gait steady despite the weight he carried on one side. As I headed back toward the main hall, a lieutenant I didn't know flagged me down near the stairwell. Excuse me, General, he said, hesitant. Sorry, ma'am. I read something about NATO doctrine restructuring, and someone mentioned a field memo from 2016 that basically built the framework. I don't suppose you were involved in that? I smiled. I might have been. He blinked. Do you still have a copy? I have something better, I said. Clarity. He laughed nervously, nodded, and stepped aside as I passed. Back in my quarters, I removed the letter again, ran my hand over the envelope one last time. Then I set it down gently atop a manila folder I'd labeled years ago, but never dared open in public. The label read, Retired but not silent. The invitation wasn't elaborate, no signature, no polite phrasing about cordially requesting your presence. I sent it the way I lived, brief, clear, and honest. No apologies needed, just presence. 7 p.m. Dining room. I wasn't sure who would show up, but I set 4 plates anyway. The table was small, 4 chairs. No centerpieces, no folded napkins. Just the weight of things unsaid filling the space where decoration might have gone. I warmed up food I'd prepped earlier that afternoon. Simple, no ceremony. I poured water into glasses, not wine. They didn't deserve to toast anything. And then I placed it in the center of the table. A small brown box, slightly dented at one corner, sealed but faded. Red ink across the top read, "Return to sender, not recognized." It was the same care package I mailed to Leora 2 years ago. Inside, a compass, a copy of my commendation from Candlestrike, and a handwritten note. "In case you ever get lost." She never opened it. I never asked why. Now it sat between the plates, unopened. At 6:59, there was a knock. Meredith arrived first, with a foil-covered dish that still had condensation on the lid, which told me it hadn't seen an oven. Rayburn followed behind her, stiffer than usual, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure what to do with them in a non-ceremonial room. Leora came last. She didn't look up when she entered. They sat. No hugs, no forced greetings, just gravity. I served them without flourish. Let silence be the only music. We ate slowly. Forks clinked against plates, like Morse code no one knew how to translate. No one asked about the flag. No one asked about the general's salute. That silence was their offering, and their avoidance. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down. "I'm not here to ask for acknowledgement," I said. "I only want to correct the story, for myself." They didn't interrupt. "I didn't walk away," I continued. "I was pulled into something bigger. I didn't fail out. I was recruited into what none of you were cleared to know about." Meredith glanced at Rayburn, who didn't meet her eyes. "I didn't stay away because I was ashamed," I said. "I stayed away because being here meant erasing what I'd done out there, and I won't do that anymore." Rayburn cleared his throat. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled without softness. "Because you never asked, and if you had, you wouldn't have believed it." Meredith looked down at her plate. She hadn't touched the food. Leora finally looked at me. Her eyes were red, but she didn't speak. Just a single tear trailing down, like she didn't know whether to let it fall or swallow it back. That was enough. I didn't need confessions. I didn't need applause. I didn't need them to say, "You were right." I just needed this. A table, a truth, and my own name intact. When dinner ended, they stood awkwardly. Rayburn offered to help clear the plates. I shook my head. "I've got it." They left one by one. Meredith first, Leora last. Before I began stacking dishes, I picked up the unopened parcel from the center of the table. I walked to the bookshelf in the living room, found a spot near the bottom, and placed it there. Not out of spite, but out of memory. Some things are better left returned. 3 weeks later, I walked into a room with my name printed on every placard, every press release, every agenda slide. No abbreviation, no hiding behind acronyms or ranks that belonged to others. It read, General Colleen Walsh, Strategic Command, RET. The NATO Regional Strategy Summit wasn't designed for sentiment, but I didn't need sentiment. I needed accuracy. I took my seat at the center table, adjusted the mic, and waited for the session to begin. Around me were officials I had briefed under aliases, diplomats I'd advised through intermediaries, and commanders who had once said, "I thought she was a myth." Let them see the myth in the flesh. My keynote ran 20 minutes, tight and sharp. I spoke about asymmetric pressure zones in Eastern Europe and the erosion of civilian networks under cyber-reliant regimes. The language was clean, direct, impersonal. Then I paused. "I've spoken to you today in terms of theory, but now I'd like to talk about choice," I said. "I want to show you what leadership looks like when no camera is present and no guarantee of applause exists." I tapped the screen behind me. A declassified order appeared. Operation Dagger, coordinates, satellite footage, signed directives. "I made a call," I continued, "to delay a strike that would have eliminated high-value targets because intel showed civilians in proximity, 7 children. The delay almost cost us the mission, but they lived." I let the silence settle. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It needs daylight. The room didn't clap. It didn't need to. Some leaned forward, some scribbled notes, but no one moved. In the second row, I saw Erica. Her badge read, Observer in Training. No rank, no title, just a name. My assistant moved through the room, distributing folders, one to each seat. Inside, a full declassified breakdown of Operation Candlestrike. Page 3. Commanded by General C. Walsh. Time-stamped, signed. Erica opened her copy. I saw her eyes scan the page. I watched her face freeze. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The file said what her mouth never would. At the break, she found me by the water station. You could have exposed me years ago, she said. I didn't need to, I replied. The truth waited. And today, it stopped waiting. She looked away, jaw clenched. I didn't think they'd believe you. That was never your right to assume. She nodded, just barely, and stepped aside to let someone pass. That was the end of it. I left before the final panel, walked the streets of D.C. like I had when I was 23, except this time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in someone else's world. Back home, a letter waited on my desk. Handwritten. From a junior officer I'd mentored once, briefly. I want to do it right, it said. Not just the tactics, the cost, the silence. I want to understand that too. I pulled out a blank card and wrote back. I don't teach war, I wrote. I teach the cost of silence. Then I opened the glass case I'd ordered the week prior and gently placed my uniform inside. Not folded, not hidden, but displayed. I didn't need to wear it anymore. It spoke loud enough on its own. They erased me from the picture. I became the frame.